I had always been a night owl, preferring the quiet solitude of the open road under the moonlight. As a truck driver for a logistics company, I reveled in the freedom my job provided. One night, as I prepared for another routine haul, my manager, Mark, approached me with a look of concern. "John, we have a problem. Mike and his truck have gone missing," Mark said, his voice low and serious. "We need you to find him. Last we heard, he was near the old logging road by the woods." I agreed, my curiosity piqued and concern for my colleague growing. I knew the area well. It was remote and eerie, especially at night. As I drove towards the last known location of Mike's truck, a sense of unease settled over me. The moon hung high in the sky, casting long, ominous shadows over the dense forest. When I arrived at the spot, I noticed the faint glow of headlights in the distance, partially obscured by the trees. I parked my truck and ventured into the woods, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound in the still night. The air was thick with tension, and my breath came in short, nervous bursts. I followed a narrow path that led to a small, secluded lake. There, by the water's edge, I saw Mike's truck, damaged and abandoned. My heart pounded as I approached the vehicle cautiously. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A woman stood by the truck, her back to me. She was unnaturally tall, with long, matted hair cascading down her back. Her nails were like claws, and when she turned, I saw her face. Her mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. She was hunched over something, and as I squinted in the dim light, I realized with horror that she was eating Mike. The sight was so grotesque and terrifying that I let out an involuntary gasp. The woman snapped her head up, her eyes locking onto mine. With a guttural growl, she began to move towards me, faster than I thought possible. Panicking, I stumbled back, tripping over roots and rocks, my heart pounding in my chest. I managed to get to my feet and sprinted back to my truck, the sound of her pursuit close behind. Adrenaline fueled my escape, and I didn't stop until I was safely inside my vehicle, doors locked and engine roaring to life. I sped back to the company, barely daring to glance in the rearview mirror, afraid of what I might see. Back at the depot, I burst into Mark's office, breathless and shaking. I recounted the horrifying encounter, my voice trembling with fear. Mark listened, his face growing paler with each passing moment. After a moment of silence, he nodded. "We need to recover the dash cam from Mike's truck," he said. A team was quickly assembled, and I reluctantly led them back to the site. The forest seemed even more menacing in the daylight, the shadows hiding untold horrors. When we reached the lake, the truck was still there, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. The team recovered the dash cam and returned to the depot. In the safety of Mark's office, we played the footage. The video showed Mike driving along the dark road, the forest looming on either side. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, standing in the middle of the road. As the truck approached, the camera captured her terrifying features: sharp teeth, long nails, and an unnaturally tall frame. Mike swerved to avoid her, losing control and crashing through the guardrail, tumbling down the slope to the lake. The last thing the camera recorded before going black was the woman slowly approaching the wreckage. The room was silent as the video ended, everyone too stunned to speak. Mark finally broke the silence. "We need to report this to the authorities," he said, his voice grim, "and warn anyone else who might be traveling that road." I nodded, the image of the woman forever etched into my mind. The forest, once a place of peaceful solitude, had become a place of nightmares. As I left the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her next victim. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on, but the incident haunted my every waking moment. One night, as I prepared for another haul, I noticed something peculiar on my truck's windshield. A single, long claw mark, fresh and glistening under the moonlight. My heart raced as I scanned the surrounding darkness, but saw nothing. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just paranoia. On the road, I kept glancing in my mirrors, expecting to see those piercing eyes and jagged teeth. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life, but instead of the usual chatter, a chilling voice whispered, "I see you, John." I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding to a halt on the deserted highway. The radio fell silent, but the tension in the air was palpable. I checked the mirrors again and nearly jumped out of my skin. She was there, standing in the middle of the road, her eyes locked onto mine. Frantically, I shifted into reverse, but she started walking towards me, her pace quickening. The growl from her throat echoed in the night air. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to find a way out. Just as she was about to reach my door, I floored the accelerator, speeding away, leaving her behind in a cloud of dust. I didn't stop driving until I reached the depot, breathless and drenched in sweat. I stumbled into Mark's office, but this time the building was eerily silent. I found him in his office, but something was wrong. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. Claw marks ran across his chest, deep and fatal. I backed away, my mind reeling. The woman, no, the monster, had followed me. She had already started her hunt. I rushed outside, intending to call the police, but the sound of heavy breathing stopped me in my tracks. There she was, standing in the shadows, her eyes glowing with a sinister light. "You led me to more prey, John," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "You'll always lead me to more." My scream echoed through the night as she lunged at me, and the last thing I saw was her twisted smile before everything went black. The forest, once a place of peaceful solitude, had become a place of endless nightmares, and I had become its latest victim. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. For years, the legend of the woodsman had haunted the minds of those who dared to venture into the remote forest. Whispers of his brutal killings spread fear among campers and hikers, but the truth behind the stories remained shrouded in mystery. Some said he was a ghost, others a man driven mad by the isolation of the wilderness. No one had ever seen him and lived to tell the tale. Until now. My friends and I had been planning our camping trip for months. It was meant to be an escape from the chaos of the city, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. We chose a secluded spot deep in the woods, far from any marked trails or campsites. It was perfect, or so we thought. The first day was idyllic. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and spent the evening around the campfire, laughing and telling stories. As the night deepened, the forest around us grew quiet, the only sounds being the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. I couldn't shake a feeling of unease, but I dismissed it as my mind playing tricks on me. On the second day, we decided to explore the area. We hiked through dense underbrush, marveling at the untouched beauty of the forest. As we ventured further, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to take a look inside. The cabin was empty, but something about it felt wrong. The air was thick with a sense of dread, and the walls were covered in strange, cryptic symbols. We quickly left, our previous excitement replaced with a growing sense of unease. That night, the woods seemed to come alive with sinister intent. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it strange, almost human-like wails. We huddled close to the fire, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. As the hours passed, exhaustion finally claimed us, and we retreated to our tents. I woke in the middle of the night to a blood-curdling scream. It was Emily. I stumbled out of my tent, heart racing, and saw her standing at the edge of the clearing, pointing into the darkness. "There's someone out there," she cried. We shone our flashlights into the woods, but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified, and we decided it was best to stay together by the fire. We sat in tense silence, each of us scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Hours passed without incident, and just as we were beginning to relax, we heard it, a low, guttural growl, coming from the direction of the cabin. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees, and in that moment, we saw him. A tall figure, shrouded in darkness, standing just beyond the reach of the light. The woodsman. He moved with an unnatural grace, silently stalking toward us. Panic set in, and we scrambled to gather our things, but it was too late. He was upon us. Emily screamed again as he lunged at her, his eyes glowing with malevolent intent. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and swung it at him, the flames illuminating his twisted, monstrous face. He let out an otherworldly shriek and retreated into the shadows, but I knew he wasn't gone. "Run!" I shouted, and we took off into the woods, adrenaline propelling us forward. We didn't stop until we were sure we had lost him, collapsing in a clearing far from our campsite. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too terrified to sleep. When dawn finally broke, we made our way back to the campsite, hoping against hope that it had all been a nightmare. The scene that greeted us was worse than any nightmare. Our tents were shredded, and blood stained the ground where we had last seen Emily. There was no sign of her, only the unmistakable evidence of a struggle. We stood there, paralyzed by fear and shock, when suddenly we heard a rustling in the bushes. Heart pounding, I turned to see Emily staggering toward us, covered in blood and dirt, her eyes wide with terror. "He's coming," she whispered, before collapsing to the ground. We gathered her up, frantic to get her to safety. As we carried her through the forest, I could hear faint, taunting laughter echoing around us. The woodsman was toying with us, savoring our fear. Just when we thought we might make it out, we reached a steep ravine. We had no choice but to climb down, Emily's weight making it even more difficult. Halfway down, the rocks beneath my feet gave way, sending us tumbling into the darkness below. I woke to the sound of Emily's screams. Disoriented, I realized we were back in the clearing near the cabin. The woodsman stood over her, his eyes gleaming with sadistic delight as he dragged her toward the cabin's open door. "No!" I screamed, struggling to get to my feet. But it was too late. The door slammed shut behind them, and I was left alone in the silent, oppressive darkness. Desperation and rage surged through me. I had to save her. I stumbled toward the cabin, my mind racing with fear and determination. As I reached the door, it creaked open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls were lined with more of those strange symbols. I moved forward, each step echoing ominously. At the end of the corridor, I found a room filled with old, rusty tools and chains. In the center, Emily was tied to a chair, her eyes filled with terror as the woodsman loomed over her. "Let her go!" I shouted, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. The woodsman turned to me, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "You think you can save her?" he sneered. "You're too late." Before I could react, he lunged at me, his strength overwhelming. We grappled, the sound of our struggle filling the room. I fought with everything I had, but he was too strong. He pinned me to the ground, his eyes burning with malevolence. As he raised a rusty blade to strike, I saw Emily struggling against her bonds, desperation giving her a burst of strength. She managed to break free and grabbed one of the tools from the table, swinging it at the woodsman with all her might. The blade sank into his back, and he let out a bone-chilling scream, his grip on me loosening. I took the opportunity to push him off and scramble to my feet. Together, Emily and I fought him, our combined efforts finally overpowering the monstrous figure. He collapsed to the ground, a pool of dark, viscous blood spreading around him. We stood there, panting and exhausted, staring at the lifeless body. But the victory felt hollow. The horrors of the night had left us shattered, and we knew the memory would haunt us forever. We stumbled out of the cabin, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. As we made our way back to civilization, we couldn't shake the feeling that the woodsman's spirit still lingered in the forest, waiting for his next victims. Months later, I received an anonymous letter. It contained only a single sentence: "The woodsman never dies." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I knew that the nightmare was far from over.